Eric Gardner straightened his formal diplomatic uniform as he entered the Grand Hall of the Galactic Coalition headquarters. The massive crystal dome above let in light from 3 different suns, casting rainbow patterns across the gathered ambassadors from 27 sentient species. Even after 2 years as Earth's junior ambassador, Eric still felt his breath catch at these gatherings. "Ah, the human has arrived," came a melodic but condescending voice. Eric turned to see Ambassador Thrixnell of the Valurian Confederation gliding toward him. The tall, blue-skinned alien moved with the grace of someone who had centuries to perfect his posture. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he looked down at Eric. "Ambassador Thrixnell," Eric said with a polite bow. "Always a pleasure. Indeed. Your presence brings such youthful energy to our proceedings," Thrixnell said. Several nearby Zoraxian diplomats made chirping sounds that Eric had learned was their version of laughter. Eric forced a smile. He was 35 years old, had 2 advanced degrees in interspecies relations, and had helped negotiate Earth's first independent trade route. But to these aliens, he might as well have been a toddler. "The council meeting begins in 20 minutes, Eric said, trying to change the subject. "I understand the mineral rights of the Proxima system are being discussed." "Ah yes," said Thrixnell, waving one of his long-fingered hands. "Though I wonder why humans bother with such long-term planning. The mining operation would take 70 years to reach full production. You'll be dead by then." The Zoraxians chirped louder. One of them, Ambassador Kloth, joined in. "Perhaps they hope their grandchildren will enjoy the profits. That's how mayflies must think, yes. Always rushing to reproduce before their brief flame goes out." Eric kept his diplomatic smile fixed in place, though he felt his ears burning. This was standard treatment. The Valurians lived over 800 years. The Zoraxians routinely reached 5 centuries. Compared to them, humans with their 100-year lifespans were barely worth taking seriously. "We prefer to think of it as planning for future generations," Eric said evenly. "A concept I'm sure you can appreciate, given your own long histories." Thrixnell made a sound like tinkling bells, his species equivalent of a dismissive snort. "Planning? Your species barely has history. My grandmother helped build this very coalition headquarters 300 years ago. When we were drafting the original charter, your people were still burning fossil fuels and fighting over imaginary lines on your single planet. Perhaps that's why humans bring fresh perspectives to old problems," Eric suggested, though he knew his words would fall on deaf ears. "Fresh, yes. Like untested children offering advice to their elders," Thrixnell said. "Admirable, but hardly practical for serious galactic matters." Kloth leaned in, his green scales catching the light. "I've always wondered, how do humans manage to accomplish anything meaningful? By the time you fully understand a complex problem, you're already growing feeble. Do you ever feel your lives are little more than brief, futile flashes?" Eric opened his mouth to respond when he noticed someone watching from across the room. An older human woman with silver-streaked dark hair and piercing blue eyes. She wore Earth's diplomatic colors, but not the current uniform style. She was smiling slightly, as if the conversation amused her rather than offended her. "We make the most of the time we have," Eric said, distracted by the woman's gaze. "Quality over quantity, you might say." This triggered even more chirping laughter. Thrixnell placed a patronizing hand on Eric's shoulder. "Of course you would say that. What other choice do mayflies have? Come, let's get you some refreshment before the meeting. Something sweet, perhaps. I understand human children enjoy sugar." As Eric reluctantly followed the alien diplomats, he glanced back at the mysterious woman. She raised her glass slightly in what seemed like a salute, her smile suggesting she knew something the aliens didn't. For some reason, that small gesture made Eric stand a little taller as he walked into the lion's den of immortal diplomats once again. 1 week after the diplomatic gathering, Eric sat in his office reviewing reports when his door chimed. He looked up to see the same silver-haired woman from the reception. "Ambassador Gardner, I'm Eleanor Wright. I've been assigned as your senior advisor." Her voice was warm, but carried an accent he couldn't quite place. Eric stood to shake her hand. "Ms. Wright, I wasn't aware I was getting an advisor." "Just Eleanor, please." And it was a last-minute decision from Earth Central. She handed him a data tablet with her credentials. "They felt you could use someone with additional experience dealing with our long-lived friends." Eric scanned her file. Eleanor Wright, age 78, diplomatic service for 40 years, specialized in xenopsychology. Something seemed odd about the file, but he couldn't place what. "Well, welcome to the team," he said, "though I'm surprised we haven't crossed paths before." Eleanor smiled. "I've been in the outer colonies for some time. It's good to be back in the thick of things." Over the next few days, Eric found himself both impressed and puzzled by Eleanor. During meetings, she displayed remarkable knowledge about alien cultures. She spoke several alien languages without using a translator, including ancient Valyrian dialects that even the aliens themselves considered archaic. But it was her strange references that confused Eric the most. She would mention events as if she had been there, then quickly correct herself. The first Mars colony had that same problem with their water recyclers, she said during one meeting, then added, "or so I read in the historical accounts." Later, when discussing music with the staff, she hummed a tune and said, "This was popular when I was young," though the song had been a hit over 120 years ago. The real shock came during a dinner with Valyrian representatives. Ambassador Thrixnell was, as usual, being condescending about human lifespans. "Your species' short lives make you poor partners for long-term projects," the Valyrian said. "The Galactic Gateway Network we're proposing will take 50 years to complete. Most humans at this table won't live to see it finished." Before Eric could respond, Eleanor spoke up. "Interesting perspective, Ambassador. Though I recall your people had similar hesitations during the Antares Corridor negotiations." Thrixnell's 4 eyes blinked rapidly. The Antares Corridor. That was over 70 years ago. "Yes," Eleanor said calmly. "And yet, despite their mayfly existence, humans fulfilled every obligation in that agreement. Unlike the Valyrian commitment to provide gravitational stabilizers, which came 3 decades late." The ambassador's blue skin darkened. "How could you possibly know that?" "Those negotiations were before humans joined the coalition." "I read extensively," Eleanor said with a slight smile. "Just as I've read about the Valyrian civil conflict during the reign of Emperor Sithnar." Thrixnell dropped his eating utensil. "That was 300 years ago." "History is a hobby of mine," Eleanor replied, sipping her drink. Later, as they walked back to their quarters, Eric confronted her. "That was impressive. But how did you know those details?" "Even I didn't know about that civil conflict." Eleanor shrugged. "When you're dismissed as short-lived, you learn to arm yourself with knowledge." The next morning, Eric found Dr. Olivia Martinez, the station's medical officer, waiting in his office. "I need to talk to you about Ms. Wright's medical scan," she said, looking troubled. "Is she all right?" Eric asked. "That's just it," Dr. Martinez said, lowering her voice. "Her scan shows some anomalies I can't explain. Her cellular structure doesn't match her stated age." "What do you mean?" "I mean," Dr. Martinez said, "either our equipment is malfunctioning, or Eleanor Wright isn't 78 years old. Based on these readings, she could be much, much older." Eric thought about Eleanor's strange references and her knowledge of events from before her time. "How much older are we talking about?" Dr. Martinez shook her head. "I don't know. But I'm not sure she's entirely human either. At least, not like any human I've ever seen." Eric couldn't stop thinking about Dr. Martinez's words. After their meeting, he began to dig deeper into Eleanor's background. He spent his evenings searching through Earth's public records, looking for any trace of Eleanor Wright. What he found made little sense. There were records of women named Eleanor Wright throughout Earth's history, going back hundreds of years. One had been a scientist on the first Mars mission in 2031. Another had worked as a diplomat during the African Union formation in 2089. There was even a record of an Eleanor Wright who had helped design the first faster-than-light engine in 2124. It has to be a coincidence, Eric muttered to himself. Many people share the same name. But when he found photos, a chill ran down his spine. Though the quality of the ancient images was poor, the women in them looked remarkably similar to his Eleanor Wright. During the day, Eleanor continued to impress and confuse him. She knew details about Earth's early space exploration that weren't in any standard history books. The real problem with the first Mars landing wasn't the dust storms, she said during a lunch briefing. It was the crew's mental health. Poor Sam Wilson couldn't sleep for weeks because of the red light filtering through the habitat windows. I don't remember reading that in the mission reports, Eric said carefully. Eleanor paused, then smiled. It wasn't in the official reports. The crew kept personal journals that were released much later. Later that week, Ambassador Kloth of the Zoraxians approached Eric at a reception. The reptilian alien's eyes followed Eleanor as she chatted with a group of diplomats across the room. "Your new advisor is quite unusual," Kloth said. "She speaks our ancient trade language with the accent of the southern provinces. No human has ever mastered that dialect." "She's very talented with languages," Eric said nervously. "Indeed." Kloth's tongue flicked out, tasting the air. "Earlier today, she mentioned to me that she once visited our homeworld during the Festival of Three Moons, but humans have only been allowed on Zorax for the past 30 years, and never during sacred festivals." Eric swallowed hard. Perhaps she misspoke. Perhaps. Kloth's eyes narrowed. Or perhaps she is more than she appears. That evening, Eric invited Eleanor to his office for a private conversation. She sat across from him, completely relaxed, sipping tea from an old-fashioned ceramic cup rather than the standard station mugs. "Is something troubling you, Ambassador?" she asked. "I've been researching your background," Eric said bluntly, "and things don't add up." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. "There are records of Eleanor Wrights throughout history, going back centuries. Many of them look remarkably like you. Common name, common face," she said lightly. "You knew details about the first Mars mission that aren't in public records. You speak ancient alien dialects perfectly. And according to Dr. Martinez, your medical scans show anomalies." Eric leaned forward. "Who are you really?" Eleanor set down her teacup. For a moment, she looked tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. "I'm exactly who I say I am," she said quietly. "Eleanor Wright, human, born on Earth. The rest is complicated." "Try me," Eric said. Before she could answer, Eric's communication panel lit up. The face of a Valyrian aide appeared. "Ambassador Gardner, an emergency council session has been called. The Zoraxians and Valyrians are in a territorial dispute over the Proxima mining rights. Both ambassadors have requested your presence immediately." Eleanor stood up. "We should go. This could get ugly fast." Eric rose but blocked the door. "This conversation isn't over." Eleanor's eyes met his, and for a moment he saw something ancient in them, a depth of experience that made him feel like a child. "No," she agreed softly. "It's just beginning. But right now, Earth needs us." Reluctantly, Eric followed her out, more certain than ever that Eleanor Wright was hiding something extraordinary. The emergency council session was tense. The Valyrians and Zoraxians stood at opposite sides of the circular chamber, their representatives glaring at each other. At stake were the mining rights to a newly discovered asteroid belt in the Proxima system, rich with rare minerals essential for faster-than-light travel. "This territory was promised to us during the Treaty of Starfall," Ambassador Thrixnull insisted, his blue skin flushed darker with emotion. "A treaty your people violated 50 years ago," Ambassador Kloth countered, scales bristling. "The rights returned to open claim at that time. The council mediator, a gas-based entity named Whisper, floated between them. Both parties present their evidence. The human representatives may offer perspective as the nearest biological species to the disputed region. Eric stepped forward nervously. The Proxima system was indeed closer to Earth than to either alien homeworld, but he had little knowledge of this specific treaty dispute. "The Treaty of Starfall is before my time," he began, "but I've reviewed the basic. The Treaty of Starfall was signed in 2142. Eleanor interrupted, stepping forward. "It granted the Valyrians primary mining rights in exchange for protection against the drone collective that was threatening all organic life in that sector." The chamber went silent. Eleanor continued, her voice clear and confident. "However, in 2196, during the Valyrian resource crisis, they abandoned their protection duties for 6 standard months. The Zoraxians stepped in, losing 17 ships defending the sector. According to Article 7, Paragraph 3 of the original treaty, this constituted a material breach." Ambassador Thrixnell stared at her. "How do you know the exact article?" "That treaty predates human involvement in the coalition by decades." "I studied our history well," Eleanor said simply. "The facts are clear. The Zoraxians have a legitimate claim, but so do the Valyrians based on the original agreement. I would suggest a shared development approach, with proportional rights based on the defense contributions of each species." Whisper hovered closer. "This solution has historical precedent. It is equitable." After several hours of negotiation, both parties tentatively agreed to Eleanor's suggestion. As the session ended, Eric pulled Eleanor into a side corridor. "That treaty wasn't in any of our databases," he said. "I checked all our historical records before the meeting." Eleanor sighed. "It wouldn't be. The full text was only shared with Earth in 2219. So how did you know about it? And don't tell me you studied history again." Eleanor looked around to ensure they were alone, then gestured toward a small observation lounge. Once inside, she sealed the door. "I suppose it's time for the truth," she said. "I was hoping to avoid this conversation for a bit longer." Eric crossed his arms. "No more evasions. I was born in 2046, Eric." He stared at her. "That would make you 201 years old, yes." Eric shook his head. "That's not possible. Human lifespans have been extended to about 120 years with modern medicine, but over 200. Nobody lives that long." "Nobody except me," Eleanor said quietly. "It wasn't planned. At around 60, my friends started commenting that I looked younger than my age. By 70, doctors were confused by my test results. By 80, I realized something was very different about me. My cells weren't aging normally." "You're saying you have some kind of mutation?" Eleanor nodded. "A completely random genetic anomaly. My telomeres don't shorten the way they should. My cellular repair mechanisms continue to function at peak efficiency. I don't age like normal humans." Eric sat down heavily. "Does Earth Central know about this?" "A few top officials, yes. They've helped me create new identities every few decades. I've been a dozen different people over my life, always careful not to stay in one place or one role too long." "Why keep it secret? You could have helped advance medical science, helped extend everyone's lifespan." Eleanor's eyes grew sad. "I tried that route once. I spent 20 years as a research subject. When the scientists couldn't replicate my condition, the government wanted to keep me permanently for study. I became a specimen, not a person." She shook her head. "I won't live that way again." Eric stared at her, seeing her properly for the first time. A 200-year-old human, a living impossibility. For 3 days after Eleanor's revelation, Eric avoided being alone with her. He needed time to process what he had learned. A 200-year-old human walking among them. It seemed impossible, yet it explained so much about her. On the 4th day, Dr. Martinez called him to the medical bay. "I've completed those additional tests on Ms. Wright's samples," she said, keeping her voice low. "Eric, I've never seen anything like this. Her cells show almost no deterioration. It's as if they don't know how to age." And you're certain the tests are accurate? Eric asked, though he already knew the answer. I ran them 3 times. Dr. Martinez looked both excited and troubled. If we could understand how this works, we might be able to extend human lifespans significantly. Not just longer lives, but healthier ones too. Eric thought about what Eleanor had said about being treated as a specimen. This stays between us for now. Eleanor's privacy needs to be respected. Later that day, Eric was summoned to a private meeting with Ambassador Thrixnall. The Valyrian looked unusually serious. Ambassador Gardner, I wish to discuss your advisor, Eleanor Wright. Eric's heart raced. What about her? She possesses knowledge that no human should have. Knowledge of events before your species joined the coalition. Thrixnell's 4 eyes fixed on Eric. Yesterday, she correctly described the private chambers of our former emperor, rooms no human has ever entered. She's very well informed, Eric said carefully. Too well informed. Thrixnell leaned closer. There are whispers among my people. Some believe she may be a synthetic being programmed with historical data. Others suggest something more unusual. Before Eric could respond, the station's alert system activated. All diplomats were requested to attend an emergency session. The Valyrian territorial dispute had escalated. In the council chamber, Thrixnell was making bold demands. Given humans' limited understanding of long-term consequences, we propose that Earth representatives have only advisory status in this matter. Their species simply lacks the lifespan to grasp century-long implications. Several other long-lived species nodded in agreement. Eric rose to object, but Eleanor stepped forward first. With respect, Ambassador, she said clearly, I challenge that assumption. The chamber went quiet. Eleanor stood tall, her eyes fixed on the Valyrian. I propose a test, she continued. A challenge of historical knowledge and long-term strategy. Ambassador Thrixnell against me. The Valyrian's skin rippled with amusement. You challenge me. I have lived 4 centuries, human. I have personal memories older than your entire civilization's space program. Age alone does not equal wisdom, Eleanor replied. Experience is what matters. Intensity of experience. Diversity of experience. Kloth, the Zoraxian ambassador, flicked his tongue with interest. What are the terms of this challenge? 3 tasks, Eleanor said. First, a test of historical knowledge spanning the past 3 centuries. Second, a strategic simulation projecting outcomes over the next century. Third, an analysis of cultural adaptability based on past civilizational changes. Thrixnell laughed, the sound like chiming crystals. This is absurd. Your species barely remembers what happened 3 generations ago. How could you possibly match my knowledge of 3 centuries? Eleanor smiled. Perhaps humans understand more than you think. Do you accept, or will you hide behind your prejudice? The chamber buzzed with excited conversation. No human had ever directly challenged a Valyrian elder in such a way. Thrixnell's pride was visibly wounded. I accept your challenge, he said coldly. When I win, humans will be removed from all long-term planning committees in the coalition. And when I win, Eleanor countered, the coalition will recognize that lifespan alone does not determine a species' value in planning galactic affairs. As they left the chamber, Eric whispered urgently, Are you sure about this? He's lived over 400 years. Eleanor's eyes twinkled. Yes, but I've lived through the most transformative 2 centuries in human history. Trust me, Eric. Quality over quantity. Across the station, word of the challenge spread quickly. The ancient human against the Valyrian elder. It was to be held in 3 days, and everyone wanted to watch. The day of the challenge arrived. The grand chamber of the coalition headquarters had never been so full. Representatives from all 27 member species packed the room. Even species that rarely left their home planets sent observers. Everyone wanted to see the impossible. A human challenging a Valyrian elder on knowledge and long-term thinking. Eric sat in the front row, his stomach in knots. Dr. Martinez sat beside him, a medical scanner hidden in her pocket. She had promised to monitor Eleanor during the challenge. "She's taking a huge risk," Eric whispered. "If the Valyrians discover her secret, then we'll deal with that," Martins replied. "But I think she knows what she's doing." The chamber fell silent as Eleanor and Thrixnall took their positions at the center. The Valyrian looked confident, almost bored. Eleanor appeared calm, her back straight, her eyes clear. Whisper, the gas-based mediator, floated between them. The first challenge begins. Historical knowledge across 3 centuries. The questions have been randomly selected from secure archives. Neither participant has had prior access. The first questions seem to favor Thrixnell. Questions about ancient treaties, political shifts, and galactic events from centuries past. The Valyrian answered smoothly, occasionally glancing at Eleanor with pity. But Eleanor matched him answer for answer. When asked about the Valyrian Civil War of 2092, she not only gave the correct dates, but added details that made Thrixnall's skin change color in surprise. "The western provinces didn't rebel simply over resource allocation," she said. "They objected to Emperor Zithnar's marriage alliance with the mountain clans." His own writings confirm this, though the official history was changed a century later. Thrixnell stared at her. "How could you know that?" "Those writings were sealed in our private archives." Eleanor simply smiled and waited for the next question. As the historical challenge continued, a pattern emerged. Thrixnell knew more facts, more dates, more names. But Eleanor understood connections between events that the Valyrian missed. She saw patterns across civilizations that he had never considered. The second challenge involved strategic planning. Both were presented with a complex simulation of resource management across multiple star systems over a 100-year period. Thrixnell created a careful, conservative plan that ensured stability. Eleanor's approach was more dynamic, building in adaptation points where strategies could change as conditions evolved. "The flaw in your approach," she told the Valyrian, "is assuming conditions will remain relatively stable for a century. Human history teaches us that technological and social change accelerates over time. What seems impossible today becomes ordinary tomorrow." The Valyrian's 4 eyes blinked rapidly. "Stable systems endure. Change brings risk." "Change is inevitable," Eleanor countered. "The question is whether you anticipate it or get swept away by it." The third challenge focused on cultural adaptation. Again, Eleanor showed unexpected insight. When asked how civilizations survived massive technological shifts, she drew examples not just from human history, but from the histories of multiple species. "Humans have lived through more dramatic changes in 2 centuries than Valyrians have experienced in a millennium," she said. "From horse-drawn carriages to faster-than-light travel in just over 200 years. From isolated nation-states to a unified planet in less than 150. Our short lives don't limit our perspective, they sharpen it." As the challenge concluded, the chamber was utterly silent. Eleanor and Thrixnell stood facing each other, the Valyrian looking at the human with new eyes. "How?" he asked quietly. "How do you know all of this?" Before Eleanor could answer, Ambassador Kloth stepped forward, his reptilian eyes fixed on her. "I believe I know," the Zoraxian said, "and I believe it changes everything we thought we knew about humans." Eric tensed, ready to intervene. The room waited as Kloth circled Eleanor slowly, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the air around her. "You," Kloth said finally, "are not like other humans, are you, Eleanor Wright?" The Grand Chamber had gone completely silent. All eyes were on Eleanor as Ambassador Kloth circled her, his scaled head tilted in curiosity. "You are something impossible," the Zoraxian said. "Something we did not believe could exist." Eric stood up, ready to intervene, but Eleanor gave him a small shake of her head. "You're right," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I am not like other humans. I was born in the year 2046. A wave of gasps and murmurs swept through the chamber. Thrixnell's blue skin paled to nearly white. "That would make you over 200 years old," Eleanor finished for him. A random genetic mutation that my species doesn't fully understand yet. My cells don't age like those of normal humans. Whisper, the mediator, drifted closer. This changes the parameters of the challenge. No, Eleanor said firmly. It doesn't. I am still human. I've simply lived longer than most of my kind. The point remains the same. Judging a species by their natural lifespan ignores what truly matters. Their perspective, their adaptability, their unique view of the universe. Cloth flicked his tongue. We have been studying humans since first contact. Your species fascinated us. How could beings with such brief lives build such complex civilizations? How could they advance so quickly? We theorized that your short lives gave you a different relationship with time. And you were right, Eleanor said. Humans don't have the luxury of centuries to ponder decisions. We must act, adapt, and move forward quickly. We pack more living into our short spans than many long-lived species do in centuries. Frixinel had recovered from his shock. Your existence proves nothing. You are an anomaly, not representative of your kind. Actually, Eleanor smiled, my existence proves everything. I've lived through 2 centuries of human history. I've seen more change, more adaptation, more growth than many Galurians see in twice that time. And yet, when given more time, humans are capable of the long view too. We simply have a different relationship with change. The council mediator called for a vote on the original proposition, whether humans should be excluded from long-term planning committees. The results were decisive. The motion was rejected. In the days that followed, the station buzzed with the news of the ancient human. Eleanor found herself the center of attention, fielding endless questions from curious aliens. To Eric's surprise, she answered them openly and patiently. Why reveal your secret now? He asked her as they watched the stars from the observation deck. You've kept it hidden for so long. Because it was time, she said simply. Humanity needs a seat at the table. We have something valuable to offer the coalition, our perspective on change and adaptation. And I was tired of hiding. Will you let the doctors study your condition now? Eric asked. Eleanor nodded. On my terms. Dr. Martinez has already started gathering a research team. Perhaps they'll find a way to help others live longer, healthier lives. But I won't be locked away as a specimen again. A month later, a new committee was formed to bridge the perspectives of short-lived and long-lived species. Eleanor was appointed as its first chair, with Thrixinol as her co-chair. I still find it hard to believe, the Valurian told her as they prepared for their first meeting. 200 years is impressive for a human, but still so brief compared to my kind. True, Eleanor agreed. But it's not how many years you live that matters most. It's what you do with them. And perhaps both our species can learn from each other. As Eric watched them walk together down the corridor, he felt a new sense of pride. The coalition would never see humans the same way again. Eleanor had shown them that humanity's so-called weakness, their brief lives, was actually a source of strength, forcing them to embrace change and live with greater intensity. Quality over quantity, he murmured to himself, smiling as he turned to prepare Earth's next proposal to the coalition. Thanks to Eleanor, they would actually listen this time.